March 18, 2024. The Austrian Alps, near the village of Wolfgangsee in the Salzkammergut region. A construction crew breaking ground for a new alpine resort hotel strikes something unexpected 40 feet below the surface, reinforced concrete that shouldn't exist. The excavator operator, Klaus Zimmermann, age 53, shuts down his machinery and climbs into the pit to investigate. What he discovers sends a chill through the entire archaeological community. The concrete forms the entrance to a tunnel system, remarkably preserved, extending deep into the mountainside. Within hours, the Austrian Federal Monuments Office dispatches a team led by Dr. Helena Kovacs, a specialist in World War II fortifications. What they find inside defies every expectation. The tunnel branches into 3 separate chambers, each approximately 12 feet wide and 8 feet high, with electrical wiring still intact along the walls. The air inside carries the musty scent of decades-old stagnation, mixed with something else, preserved leather and paper. In the largest chamber, investigators discover a steel footlocker, German military issue, serial number WH4472K. The lock has rusted through. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crumbles at the touch, they find documents that should not exist. A Soldbuch, a German military paybook, belonging to Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann, born April 22, 1912 in Stuttgart. Service number 4,477,283. Assigned to Nachtschubeinheit 447, a Wehrmacht supply unit stationed in occupied Poland and later reassigned to Austria in early 1944. The discovery itself isn't extraordinary. Thousands of German military artifacts remain scattered across Europe, hidden in bunkers and forgotten fortifications. What makes Dr. Kovacs' hands tremble as she examines the documents is the date on the last entry, November 8, 1944. Written in precise, controlled handwriting, final preparations complete, tomorrow at dawn. According to official Wehrmacht records, meticulously preserved in the German Federal Archives in Freiburg, Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann died on April 15, 1945, during the final Soviet assault on Berlin. His name appears on the memorial wall at the German military cemetery in Halb, Brandenburg, among 22,000 other soldiers who fell in the last desperate weeks of the Third Reich. His wife, Anna Hartman, received official notification of his death on May 30, 1945, from the Provisional German administration under Allied occupation. But the documents in this tunnel tell a different story. Alongside the Soldbuch, investigators find a Swiss passport issued in Bern on December 2, 1944, bearing Hartmann's photograph but a different name, Heinrich Waldmann, merchant, born in Zurich. There's a train ticket from Salzburg to Milan, dated November 10, 1944. A letter of credit from a bank in Buenos Aires, stamped January 1945. And most damning of all, a detailed map marked with a route from the Austrian Alps through Switzerland, into Italy, and across the Mediterranean to Spain. Dr. Kovacs photographs everything in situ before careful extraction. The Austrian Interior Ministry seals the site. Within a week, international investigators from Germany, Israel, and Poland arrive to examine what may be one of the most sophisticated individual escape operations ever documented from World War II. Because if Friedrich Hartmann escaped in November 1944, 5 months before the official date of his death, it raises a terrifying question. How many others falsified their deaths and vanished into post-war obscurity? The official record says Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann died a soldier's death in the rubble of Berlin. The evidence in this alpine tunnel says he walked away from the war, assumed a false identity, and disappeared into a life that should never have been his. If you want to see what investigators found when they traced his entire escape route across 3 continents, hit the like button and subscribe. Historical background. Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann entered the world in the spring of 1912 in Stuttgart, the industrial heart of southwest Germany. His father, Ernst Hartman, worked as a mechanical engineer at the Daimler factory. His mother, Margarethe, managed the household with the precision expected of a middle-class German family in the years before the First World War. Friedrich, the eldest of 3 children, grew up in a modest apartment near the Neckar River, where the sound of factory whistles marked the rhythm of daily life. School records from the Stuttgart West Realschule show a student of above-average intelligence but unremarkable ambition. Friedrich excelled in mathematics and technical drawing, skills inherited from his father's engineering background. His teachers noted his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to solve complex logistical problems. In 1928, at age 16, he entered an apprenticeship with a local shipping and logistics company, learning the intricacies of supply chain management, inventory control, and transportation coordination, skills that would define his entire life. The economic collapse of 1929 devastated Germany. Friedrich's father lost his position at Daimler. The family slipped from comfortable middle-class stability into the desperate uncertainty that gripped millions of Germans during the Weimar Republic's final years. Friedrich, now 17, became the primary breadwinner, taking a position as a warehouse supervisor for a textile import company. The experience taught him something crucial. In chaos, the person who controls supplies controls survival. In 1933, Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party seized power. Friedrich, now 21, joined the Wehrmacht not out of ideological fervor but pragmatic necessity. The military offered stability, steady pay, and the opportunity to use his logistical expertise. His personnel file, preserved in the German Federal Military Archives, describes him as competent, detail-oriented, politically reliable but not zealous. He wasn't a Nazi true believer. He was a functionary, a technician of supply chains who saw the military as a career. By 1936, Friedrich had risen to the rank of lieutenant and married Anna Schraber, the daughter of a Stuttgart pharmacist. Their wedding photograph, discovered in the tunnel alongside other personal effects, shows a serious young man in Wehrmacht uniform standing beside a woman with gentle eyes and a cautious smile. They had 2 children, a daughter, Greta, born in 1937, and a son, Klaus, born in 1939. Friedrich's letters from this period, later recovered from Anna's family estate, reveal a devoted father concerned about providing for his young family as Germany prepared for war. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Friedrich's unit, Nachtschubeinheit 447, received deployment orders. Supply units formed the invisible backbone of German military operations. While panzer divisions and infantry units received glory and attention, supply officers like Friedrich ensured ammunition, fuel, food, and medical supplies reached the front lines. His unit followed behind the advancing German forces, establishing supply depots and coordinating logistics across occupied territory. Friedrich's service record shows steady competence. He received promotion to Oberleutnant in 1941. His commanding officers praised his ability to maintain supply lines under difficult conditions. There's no evidence he participated in combat operations or atrocities. He was a quartermaster, a manager of warehouses and transportation schedules, the kind of officer who dealt in manifests and inventory lists rather than weapons and battles. But Friedrich possessed something that made him exceptional among the millions of ordinary Wehrmacht soldiers: an intimate understanding of how goods moved across Europe. He knew railway schedules, border crossing procedures, customs documentation, and the hidden corridors of continental commerce. He understood which officials could be bribed, which routes avoided scrutiny, and how to make cargo disappear from official records. These skills, developed to serve the Wehrmacht's supply system, would later become instruments of his survival. By 1943, Germany's military situation deteriorated. The defeat at Stalingrad, the surrender in North Africa, and the relentless Allied bombing campaign created growing desperation. Friedrich's letters home became less frequent and more carefully worded, aware of military censorship. In February 1943, his unit received reassignment from occupied Poland to Austria, stationed near Salzburg to coordinate supply operations for German forces defending Italy against Allied invasion. Then came the catastrophe that changed everything. On March 12, 1943, British bombers conducting a nighttime raid on Munich struck a residential district instead of their intended industrial target. Among the buildings destroyed was an apartment complex where Friedrich's family had relocated the previous year, seeking safety from Stuttgart's increasingly intense bombing. Anna Hartman, age 32, and both children Greta, age 5, and Klaus, age 3, died in the rubble. Friedrich received notification on March 15, 1943. According to testimony from his fellow officers, preserved in post-war interrogation records, he showed no outward emotion. He attended a brief memorial service organized by his commanding officer, then returned to work with the same mechanical efficiency. But something fundamental broke inside him that day. Colleagues later reported subtle changes. Friedrich began keeping meticulous personal records, separate from official documentation. He started hoarding supplies, small amounts, nothing that would trigger suspicion, and storing them in locations known only to himself. He cultivated relationships with civilian contractors, Swiss businessmen, and Austrian locals who operated on the margins of legality. By late 1943, Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not die for the Third Reich. He would not perish in the final, inevitable collapse of Hitler's regime. He had already lost everything that mattered. The only thing remaining was survival, and Friedrich possessed exactly the skills necessary to disappear. Throughout 1944, as Germany's military position became hopeless, Friedrich prepared. His official duties provided perfect cover. As a supply officer, he had authorization to requisition materials, arrange transportation, and maintain contact with civilian suppliers across Austria and into neutral Switzerland. Every requisition form he filed, every supply manifest he signed, every warehouse inventory he conducted, each served dual purposes. Officially, he was serving the Wehrmacht. Secretly, he was building an escape route. His personnel file shows nothing unusual. Performance evaluations remained consistent. Reliable officer, maintains adequate supply readiness. His commanding officer, Hauptmann Werner Kessler, never suspected that Friedrich was methodically constructing the infrastructure of his disappearance. The tunnel system discovered in 2024 near Wolfgangsee represents only the final waypoint in a network Friedrich spent months creating. A hidden chamber stocked with civilian clothes, false documents, gold coins siphoned from supply operations, and everything necessary to become someone else. By November 1944, Soviet forces were advancing from the east, American and British forces from the west. The collapse was imminent. Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann, Oberleutnant in the Wehrmacht, responsible family man turned hollow survivor, prepared to vanish into the chaos. The critical moment. November 7, 1944. The Austrian Alps already wore winter's first snow. Temperatures dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. Friedrich Hartmann stood in his office at Supply Depot Salzburg North, a converted warehouse complex on the city's outskirts, reviewing manifest documents by the light of a single desk lamp. The electrical grid had become unreliable. Allied bombing raids had struck the region's power infrastructure repeatedly over the preceding weeks. The depot operated on emergency generators, fuel rationed and precious. Official Wehrmacht records show Friedrich's unit maintained normal operations that day. Supply trucks departed for forward positions in northern Italy at 7:30 a.m. carrying ammunition and medical supplies. Another convoy arrived from Munich at 2:15 p.m. with replacement equipment for the 98th Infantry Division. Friedrich signed the appropriate forms, countersigned by Hartman Kessler, everything documented according to military regulations. But Friedrich maintained a second set of records, discovered decades later in the tunnel chamber. These personal notes, written in a small leather journal with pages now brittle and yellowed, reveal what actually occupied his thoughts that day. "Final inventory complete," he wrote. "Chamber sealed and stocked. Swiss contact confirms documentation ready for collection November 9th. Route to Milano verified through Innsbruck connections. Weather acceptable for mountain crossing." The official version of events shows Friedrich working late that evening, remaining at the depot until 9:45 p.m. The guard log maintained at the facility's entrance records his departure at that time. He signed out, walked to his quarters in a commandeered apartment building 6 blocks away, and according to official records, reported for duty the following morning at 6:00 a.m. The reality, as reconstructed from evidence found in the tunnel and corroborated by forensic analysis conducted in 2024, tells a different story. Friedrich did leave the depot at 9:45 p.m., but instead of returning to his quarters, he walked to a small garage he had rented under a false name 3 months earlier, using funds embezzled from supply operations. The garage, located in the Maxglen district of Salzburg, contained a civilian motorcycle, a DKW RT 125, purchased through a black market contact in October. November 8, 1944, Friedrich appeared at the depot at his usual time. The guard log confirms his arrival at 6:02 a.m. Hartman Kessler later testified during post-war interviews that Friedrich seemed normal, perhaps slightly more reserved than usual, but nothing alarming. The day proceeded according to routine. Supply operations continued. Friedrich processed requisitions, supervised loading operations, and maintained the facade of an officer executing his duties. But forensic analysis of the documents found in the tunnel revealed something extraordinary. Using specialized imaging techniques developed for historical document authentication, investigators in 2024 discovered that Friedrich had used his office time that day to complete final forgeries. The Swiss passport found in the tunnel, issued to Heinrich Waldmann, contained an official Swiss government seal that forensic experts confirmed as authentic, meaning Friedrich had obtained actual Swiss passport documentation, not a crude forgery. The passport's interior pages, however, contained subtle alterations made with extraordinary skill. Handwriting analysis conducted by Dr. Ernst Richter, a forensic document examiner at the University of Vienna, confirmed that Friedrich had practiced the signature, Heinrich Waldmann, hundreds of times. Comparison samples found in the journal show progressive refinement of the signature's characteristics until it achieved complete consistency. This level of preparation, Dr. Richter noted in his analysis report, indicates planning that likely extended 6 months or more before the actual escape attempt. At 3:30 p.m. on November 8th, Friedrich requisitioned a supply truck for what he documented as emergency delivery to Forward Depot near Innsbruck. The paperwork appears completely legitimate. The truck, a 3-ton Opel Blitz, required a driver. Friedrich assigned himself, claiming the delivery required officer supervision due to the sensitive nature of the cargo, medical supplies, and communications equipment. The truck departed Depot Salzburg North at 4:15 p.m. Guard records show Friedrich driving alone in the vehicle. Hartman Kessler approved the departure. The expected return time, November 9th, 7:00 a.m. Friedrich drove west toward Innsbruck, approximately 90 miles. The truck appeared on checkpoint logs at 2 Wehrmacht control points along the route, at Lofer at 5:45 p.m. and at Wurgel at 7:20 p.m. Both entries show nothing unusual: military supply vehicle, proper authorization documents, Oberleutnant Hartman commanding. The truck continued west into the darkening alpine evening. But Friedrich never reached Innsbruck. Instead, at approximately 8:40 p.m., He turned off the main highway onto a narrow mountain road near the village of Wolfgangsee. The road climbed steeply into dense forest, barely wide enough for the supply truck. Friedrich drove slowly, without headlights to avoid attention, navigating by moonlight and intimate familiarity with terrain he had scouted multiple times over the preceding months. 3 miles up the mountain road, at a location he had carefully selected, Friedrich stopped the truck. He worked quickly and efficiently, illuminated only by a handheld torch. The tunnel entrance, concealed behind brush and fallen timber, required 30 minutes to fully expose. Friedrich had constructed the concealment carefully during previous visits, using techniques learned from Wehrmacht field engineering manuals. The tunnel itself extended 40 feet into the mountainside, excavated over a period of 4 months using hand tools and explosive charges Friedrich had stolen in small quantities from depot inventories. The work had been exhausting, done during leave periods and days off, always alone, always secret. But the result provided exactly what Friedrich needed, a hidden cache beyond official Wehrmacht knowledge. Inside the largest chamber, Friedrich had stored everything necessary for his transformation. Civilian clothing, a wool suit, appropriate for a Swiss merchant, a leather suitcase containing shirts, toiletries, a shaving kit, the forged Swiss passport, Swiss francs and Reichsmarks, totaling approximately 8,000 Swiss francs in cash, a fortune acquired through careful embezzlement and black market trading over many months. A collection of gold coins, including 20 Vreneli gold coins, Swiss 20-franc pieces that could be easily exchanged anywhere in Europe, maps marking routes through Switzerland into Italy, and most importantly, contact information for a network Friedrich had carefully cultivated. Swiss businessmen willing to assist for appropriate compensation, Catholic priests sympathetic to helping refugees, black market smugglers who asked no questions. Friedrich changed clothes inside the tunnel chamber. The Wehrmacht uniform, with all its insignia and identity markers, came off piece by piece. He folded it carefully, along with his military paybook and personal identification documents, and placed them in the steel footlocker that would remain undiscovered for 80 years. The civilian suit fit well. He had sized it carefully during a trip to Salzburg 2 months earlier, purchased from a second-hand shop under a false name. November 9, 1944. Dawn arrived cold and gray over the Austrian Alps. At Depot Salzburg North, Hauptmann Kessler noted Friedrich's absence. The supply truck had not returned. Initial reaction: concern that Friedrich had encountered mechanical problems or adverse weather conditions. Kessler dispatched inquiries to checkpoints along the Innsbruck route. By 10:00 a.m., when no information emerged, concern shifted to alarm. Kessler ordered a search party. Military police began checking the route. The truck's last confirmed sighting, Wurgel checkpoint at 7:20 p.m. the previous evening. Meanwhile, Friedrich Wilhelm Hartman, now Heinrich Waldmann, Swiss merchant, stood at a small railway station in the village of St. Johann in Tyrol, approximately 15 miles north of the tunnel location. He had reached the station by hiking through mountain trails during the night, a grueling 7-hour journey in freezing temperatures. The motorcycle hidden near the tunnel remained unused, a deliberate choice. Friedrich knew search parties would look for vehicles. A man on foot, traveling through wilderness areas, would be nearly impossible to track. At 11:20 a.m., Friedrich purchased a ticket to Innsbruck using Swiss francs and his Heinrich Waldmann passport. The station clerk, an elderly Austrian woman named Rosa Kepler, later recalled during a 1946 investigation that the passenger seemed tired but unremarkable. A Swiss businessman, she testified. He spoke German with a slight Swiss accent. He seemed nervous about the train schedule, worried about delays. Nothing unusual, given the circumstances of wartime travel. The train departed at 12:05 p.m. Friedrich sat in a third-class compartment, surrounded by civilians, Wehrmacht soldiers on leave, and Austrian workers. He carried only the leather suitcase, dressed in civilian clothes, appearing like thousands of other travelers moving through wartime Europe. The transformation was complete. Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann had ceased to exist. Back in Salzburg, Hauptmann Kessler filed official reports. The supply truck had vanished. Oberleutnant Hartmann was missing, presumed captured by partisan forces or killed in an accident. The Wehrmacht issued standard missing in action documentation. Search operations continued for 3 days, then halted due to resource constraints and the deteriorating military situation. The supply truck, investigators discovered in 1946, had been driven off a cliff approximately 2 miles from the tunnel location. The crash destroyed the vehicle and any evidence it might have contained. Whether Friedrich staged this accident or whether someone else discovered and destroyed the abandoned truck remains unclear. What matters is the result. The physical evidence of Friedrich's escape route vanished into the alpine wilderness. Friedrich arrived in Innsbruck at 3:40 p.m. on November 9th. He walked directly to a small hotel near the railway station, the Gasthaus Tyrol, and registered under his new name. That evening, he made contact with the first link in his escape network, a Swiss businessman named Albert Moser, who operated a textile import company with offices in Innsbruck and Zurich. Moser, who died in 1967, left papers that were eventually donated to the Swiss Federal Archives. Those papers, examined during the 2024 investigation, include coded correspondence that almost certainly references Friedrich's escape. One letter, dated November 12, 1944, mentions the Stuttgart package arriving safely and proceeding to Milano as scheduled. Investigators believe this refers to Friedrich. The package metaphor was common in underground networks facilitating wartime escapes. Stuttgart likely references Friedrich's birthplace, a subtle confirmation of identity. November 10, 1944. Friedrich departed Innsbruck on a train to the Swiss border. His Heinrich Waldmann passport, with its authentic Swiss government seal and expertly forged interior documentation, passed inspection at the Austrian-Swiss frontier crossing near Feldkirch. Border guards, overwhelmed by the chaos of thousands of refugees and travelers, spent less than 2 minutes examining his documents. At 2:15 p.m., Friedrich crossed into neutral Switzerland, beyond the reach of Wehrmacht military police. That same day, back in Salzburg, Hauptmann Kessler filed updated reports. Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann, missing in action, presumed dead. The official narrative had been established. A supply officer had disappeared during routine duties, likely killed by partisan ambush or accident. Regrettable but unremarkable in the chaos of late 1944. Friedrich spent that night in Zurich, in a small boarding house that catered to transient businessmen. He slept, perhaps for the first time in weeks, without immediate fear of discovery. The investigation unfolds. March 25, 2024. Dr. Helena Kovacs stands in the forensic laboratory of the Austrian Federal Monuments Office in Vienna, examining the documents recovered from the Alpine tunnel under specialized lighting. The room smells of preservation chemicals and old paper. Her team has spent the past week carefully processing each artifact, photographing, cataloging, and conducting preliminary analysis. What began as a routine archaeological discovery has transformed into something far more complex. The preservation is remarkable, Dr. Kovacs tells a colleague. The tunnel's depth and the steel footlocker protected these materials from moisture and temperature fluctuations. We're looking at documents in near-original condition after 80 years. The investigation officially began the moment Friedrich Hartmann's name appeared in that military paybook. German Federal Archives in Freiburg received notification within 24 hours of the discovery. Israeli investigators from Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, requested access to examine whether Hartmann had any connection to war crimes or atrocities. Polish officials, given that his unit had served in occupied Poland, opened their own inquiry. Dr. Marcus Friedlander, a German military historian specializing in Wehrmacht logistics, arrives in Vienna on March 28. His analysis provides crucial context. Nachtschubeinheit 447 was a standard supply unit, he explains, not involved in combat operations or occupation duties. Their role was purely logistical, moving supplies from rear depots to forward positions. This doesn't mean individuals within such units couldn't have committed crimes, but there's no evidence this particular unit participated in atrocities. The forensic analysis proceeds methodically. First, document authentication. The Swiss passport found in the tunnel undergoes examination by specialists from the Swiss Federal Archives in Bern. Dr. Claudia Meyer, an expert in historical Swiss documents, confirms the seal is genuine, issued by the Swiss government in December 1944. But the passport photo and biographical information show signs of alteration. The seal is authentic, Dr. Meyer reports, but look at this. She displays magnified images of the passport's interior pages. The binding shows evidence of careful disassembly and reassembly. Someone with considerable skill removed the original pages, inserted new pages with false information, then rebound the document. The seal, which is the most difficult part to forge, remained intact on the outer cover. It's extraordinarily sophisticated work. Handwriting analysis provides another layer of verification. The Sollbuch contains numerous entries in Friedrich's handwriting, confirmed through comparison with documents from his Wehrmacht personnel file. The journal found alongside the Sollbuch contains additional writing, clearly by the same hand. Most dramatically, practice signatures for Heinrich Waldmann show progressive refinement. Early attempts are crude, later versions become fluid and consistent. Dr. Ernst Richter, the forensic document examiner, completes his analysis on April 5th. His report concludes, the subject demonstrated extensive preparation for identity falsification. The practice signatures indicate months of preparation. The quality of the final Waldmann signature suggests the subject could have passed as the passport holder under most inspection scenarios. This wasn't opportunistic escape. This was methodical planning. But the investigation's most significant breakthrough comes from DNA analysis. Among the personal effects in the tunnel, investigators find a hairbrush, still containing several strands of hair with intact follicles. The brush also contains what appears to be old blood, possibly from a shaving cut. These biological samples, though degraded, contain sufficient genetic material for analysis. The DNA extraction proceeds at the Institute for Forensic Medicine at the Medical University of Vienna. Dr. Thomas Becker, leading the genetics team, explains the challenge. DNA degrades over time. After 80 years, we're working with highly fragmented genetic material, but modern techniques allow us to extract and sequence even badly degraded samples. The process takes weeks. Fragments of mitochondrial DNA pass through the maternal line and, more stable than nuclear DNA, emerge first. Then, crucially, partial autosomal DNA profiles, enough to establish family relationships, but comparison requires living relatives. This is where investigators get creative. Genealogical research traces Friedrich's family tree. His parents and siblings are deceased, but there are descendants through his sister, Margaret Hartman, who married in 1933 and had 3 children. One of those children, Friedrich's nephew, is still alive in 2024, Johann Kepler, age 89, living in Frankfurt. On April 18th, investigators contact Johann Kepler, explain the discovery, and request a DNA sample for comparison. Kepler, a retired schoolteacher, agrees immediately. "I was 7 years old when Uncle Friedrich disappeared," he tells investigators. "My mother never believed he died in Berlin. She always said he was too clever for that." The DNA comparison takes another 2 weeks. Results arrive on May 2nd, 2024. The hair samples from the tunnel and Johann Kepler's DNA share sufficient genetic markers to confirm familial relationship consistent with uncle-nephew connection. The probability calculation. 99.7% certainty that the tunnel's occupant was related to Kepler, and by extension, was Friedrich Wilhelm Hartman. But DNA evidence only confirms identity. It doesn't prove the escape narrative. For that, investigators need documentary evidence tracing Friedrich's path beyond November 1944. Dr. Kovacs' team begins the painstaking process of following Friedrich's trail through historical records. The Swiss Federal Archives in Bern become the next stop. Using the name Heinrich Waldmann and the passport number from the discovered document, researchers search Swiss border-crossing records, hotel registrations, and banking archives. The first breakthrough comes on May 15th. A hotel registration card from the Gasthaus Tyrol in Innsbruck, dated November 9, 1944, lists Heinrich Waldmann, merchant, Zurich, as a guest. The handwriting on the registration card matches samples from Friedrich's journal. Forensic analysis confirms it's the same person. Then more discoveries emerge from Swiss archives. A border crossing record at Feldkirch, dated November 10, 1944, shows Heinrich Waldmann entering Switzerland from Austria. The document contains a customs stamp and an inspector's signature. Most significantly, Swiss banking records reveal something extraordinary. The Cantonalbank of Zurich maintains historical archives dating back to the 19th century. On May 22nd, researchers discover that Heinrich Waldmann opened an account on November 14, 1944, with a deposit of 6,200 Swiss francs, an enormous sum for that period, equivalent to approximately 2 years' salary for a skilled worker. The account remained active until 1958. Investigators obtain authorization to examine the complete transaction history. The records show regular deposits and withdrawals, consistent with someone living on the funds. But the most revealing detail appears in the account's opening documentation. The address listed for Heinrich Waldmann is in Milan, Italy. The investigation shifts to Italy. Dr. Kovacs coordinates with Italian researchers at the Archivio di Stato in Milan, the state archives. Italian records from the 1940–1958 period are chaotic. The country experienced civil war, liberation, and post-war reconstruction. But patient research yields results. A residence permit application, filed with Milan municipal authorities in January 1945, lists Heinrich Waldmann, Swiss national, merchant, as requesting permission to reside in the city. The application includes a photograph. Investigators compare it to Friedrich Hartmann's Wehrmacht identification photo from 1943. Forensic facial recognition analysis, conducted using modern biometric software, confirms a match. The probability, 94% that the two photographs show the same individual. By June 2024, investigators have reconstructed substantial portions of Friedrich's escape route and early post-war life. But major questions remain. How did he get from Switzerland to Italy in late 1944, when the region was still an active combat zone? Who helped him? How long did he remain in Milan? Where did he go afterward? The answer to these questions comes from an unexpected source. A letter discovered in late June 2024 in a private archive in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The letter, dated March 1953, is addressed to my dearest Greta, the name of Friedrich's daughter, who died in the 1943 bombing. But investigators realize Greta is likely a coded reference to someone else, possibly a surviving relative or a contact within Friedrich's network. The letter, written in German with careful handwriting matching all previous samples, contains subtle admissions. "I think of you often, though I know this message may never reach you," it reads. "The years since I left the mountains have been lonely. Milan grew too dangerous after '46, so I moved south, then across the ocean. The warmth here reminds me of nothing from home. I am safe, but I am no one." The letter's existence raises an explosive question. Did Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann survive not just the immediate escape, but decades afterward? Did he live into the 1950s, possibly longer, under his false identity. Genealogical investigators in Argentina begin searching records for Heinrich Waldman or variations of the name. German expatriate communities in Buenos Aires, which grew substantially after 1945, become focus areas. But the trail grows murky. Argentina in the 1940s and 1950s was notoriously welcoming to European refugees, asking few questions about wartime activities or identities. By July 2024, the investigation reaches an impasse. The evidence conclusively proves Friedrich Hartman faked his death, escaped through Switzerland, lived in Milan for several years, and likely emigrated to South America. But the final chapter, when and where he died, whether he maintained contact with anyone from his former life, whether he felt remorse or satisfaction, remains elusive. On July 18th, investigators hold a press conference in Vienna. Dr. Kovacs presents the findings. We have conclusively proven that Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann did not die in 1945, as official records indicate. He orchestrated a sophisticated escape, assumed a false identity, and lived for at least 13 years beyond the war's end. This case reveals the limitations of post-war justice and the sophistication of individual escape networks. The conference generates international attention. Historians debate Friedrich's moral culpability. He wasn't a high-ranking Nazi. He wasn't accused of war crimes. But he was a Wehrmacht officer who chose desertion and identity falsification over accountability. The question haunts the investigation. Should Friedrich Hartmann be remembered as a clever survivor or a man who evaded his responsibility to face judgment for serving the Third Reich? The escape network revealed. The most significant revelation of the 2024 investigation comes not from analyzing Friedrich Hartmann's escape in isolation, but from recognizing it as part of a larger pattern. Dr. Kovacs' team, collaborating with researchers across Europe and South America, begins identifying connections between Friedrich's route and a broader underground network that facilitated escapes for dozens, possibly hundreds, of individuals seeking to disappear in the war's final months and aftermath. The network's existence had been suspected for decades. Nazi hunters and historical researchers knew that many war criminals and Wehrmacht officers had vanished too completely to be merely lucky. But the discovery of Friedrich's tunnel, with its meticulous documentation, provides the first concrete roadmap of how such escapes functioned at the individual level. The route Friedrich followed, Austrian Alps to Switzerland to Italy to South America, mirrors the infamous ratlines that Catholic clergy and sympathetic officials used to help fugitives escape Europe. But Friedrich's escape preceded the most famous ratlines, which became fully operational only after Germany's surrender in May 1945. This suggests Friedrich either pioneered his own route or tapped into networks already functioning by late 1944, networks that later expanded into the well-documented post-war ratlines. Swiss businessman Albert Moser, whose name appears in the coded correspondence found in the Innsbruck connection, emerges as a crucial facilitator. Further investigation of Moser's business records, preserved in the Swiss Federal Archives, reveals extensive cross-border trade operations during the war years. Moser's company imported and exported textiles, but Swiss intelligence reports from 1945, declassified in 2002, suggest the textile business served as cover for other activities, including currency smuggling and facilitating illegal border crossings. Moser died in 1967, but his grandson, Thomas Moser, age 73 in 2024, agrees to speak with investigators. The conversation, conducted in Zurich on June 12, 2024, provides extraordinary context. Thomas Moser possesses his grandfather's private diaries, never previously disclosed to researchers. "My grandfather was not a political man," Thomas explains, "but he was a businessman who understood that chaos creates opportunities. During the war, he helped people cross borders, Jews fleeing persecution, but also German officers seeking escape. Allied pilots shot down over Austria anyone who could pay. He didn't ask about politics or morality. He asked about money. The diaries confirm that Albert Moser facilitated multiple escapes during late 1944 and throughout 1945. The entries use code names, but several details match Friedrich's known timeline. One entry, dated November 11, 1944, notes, Stuttgart package proceeding successfully. Milano contact confirmed. Payment received as agreed. The payment likely refers to gold coins or cash Friedrich provided. The Milano connection, Milan, Italy, represents the next link in the network. Northern Italy in November 1944 remained under German and Italian fascist control, but the political situation was chaotic. Allied forces had liberated southern Italy, but the north remained contested. This instability created opportunities for those who understood how to navigate the chaos. Research into Milan's German expatriate community during 1944-1946 reveals a substantial population of Wehrmacht deserters, German civilians, and Austrian refugees. The city, damaged by Allied bombing but still functioning, offered anonymity in ways smaller towns couldn't. Friedrich's decision to settle there, even temporarily, made strategic sense. But how did Friedrich travel from Switzerland to Milan in late 1944? The Swiss-Italian border was officially closed to unauthorized crossings. This is where the network's sophistication becomes apparent. Italian researchers, examining customs records from the Swiss-Italian border town of Chiasso, discover evidence of systematic document forgery and bribery. Several Swiss customs officials working at Chiasso in 1940-1945 came under investigation in 1947 for accepting bribes to allow illegal border crossings. The investigation resulted in 2 convictions, but records from the proceedings, preserved in Swiss court archives, mention a network that specialized in providing false documentation for German nationals seeking refuge from advancing Soviet forces. This network, investigators believe, processed Friedrich Hartman and numerous others. The cost was substantial. Survivors who used similar networks in later months reported paying between 5,000 and 10,000 Swiss francs for safe passage and documentation. Friedrich's banking records show withdrawals consistent with such payments. Once in Milan, Friedrich needed shelter and continued anonymity. Evidence suggests he resided in the Porta Venezia district, an area with substantial German and Austrian expatriate population. A boarding house ledger from the Casa Helvetica, a residence that catered to Swiss and German speakers, lists H. Waldman as a resident from January 1945 through September 1946. The address matches the one Friedrich listed on his Swiss bank account. But Milan grew increasingly dangerous for German nationals as the war ended. Mussolini's execution in April 1945 and the subsequent violence against fascists and Nazi collaborators created an atmosphere of vigilante justice. Friedrich, though not accused of specific crimes, would have been vulnerable merely because of his German background and military service. This explains his next move, departure to South America. The route from Italy to Argentina in 1946 was well established. The Italian port of Genoa served as the primary departure point. Ships operated by various lines, including the Dodero line, based in Argentina, transported thousands of European refugees, asking few questions about passengers' wartime activities. Passenger manifests from ships departing Genoa for Buenos Aires in 1946 contain over 8,000 names. Italian and Argentine researchers have been digitizing and cross-referencing these manifests since the early 2000s, seeking information about Nazi war criminals who escaped via this route. On July 9, 2024, researchers identify a match. Heinrich Waldman, merchant, age 34, Swiss national, listed on the passenger manifest of the SS Genoa, which departed Genoa on October 17, 1946, and arrived in Buenos Aires on November 19, 1946. The age matches Friedrich's actual age. The nationality matches his false documents. The timing aligns with evidence of his departure from Milan. This represents the strongest documentary proof that Friedrich successfully completed his escape to South America. But the network extended beyond Friedrich's individual journey. Further investigation reveals that at least 23 other passengers on the same ship had suspicious backgrounds or documentation inconsistencies. Several used Swiss or Spanish passports issued during 1944-1946, a period when such documents were commonly forged or falsely obtained. Among these passengers, researchers identify at least 3 individuals who were subsequently proven to be former Wehrmacht officers traveling under false identities. One, using the name Karl Brenner, was later identified as Hauptmann Rudolf Stein, wanted for war crimes in Yugoslavia. Another, Joseph Huber, was actually SS Obersturmführer Hans Decker, who escaped prosecution for activities in occupied France. This pattern reveals the network's scale. The SS Genoa was just one ship on one voyage. Between 1946 and 1952, hundreds of ships made similar journeys. If the percentage of fugitives remained consistent, potentially thousands of former Wehrmacht officers, SS personnel, and Nazi officials escaped to South America using similar methods. The network required multiple components to function: document forgers in Switzerland and Italy, corrupt officials at borders and ports, shipping companies willing to transport passengers with questionable documentation, and receiving networks in destination countries. Friedrich's escape, meticulously documented through his tunnel discovery, provides a template for understanding how these components work together. Financial records offer additional insights. The Swiss bank account Heinrich Waldmann maintained shows not only withdrawals consistent with living expenses and travel costs, but also occasional deposits continuing after his arrival in Argentina. The deposits, though small, suggest Friedrich maintained some form of business activity or employment. The final transaction in the account occurs in March 1958, a withdrawal of 340 Swiss francs, leaving a balance of 127 francs. The account went dormant afterward, suggesting something significant happened to Friedrich around that time. By August 2024, researchers have identified approximately 80 individuals who likely used the same network Friedrich employed. The majority were Wehrmacht officers of middle rank: captains, lieutenants, supply officers, administration personnel. Not the famous names that Nazi hunters pursued most vigorously, but the functional officers who understood logistics, documentation, and bureaucratic systems. This represents the network's genius. It targeted individuals with the skills to plan their own escapes, but without the notoriety that would attract immediate pursuit. Friedrich Hartman exemplified this profile perfectly: competent, technically skilled, unremarkable enough to avoid attention, but resourceful enough to execute a complex escape plan. The investigation also reveals that Catholic clergy played significant roles in these networks, though their involvement often stemmed from humanitarian motives rather than Nazi sympathy. Several priests in the Milan area during 1945-1946 provided assistance to German refugees, often unable or unwilling to distinguish between genuine victims of war and individuals fleeing accountability. One priest, Father Antonio Grasso, maintained detailed personal records that his diocese donated to the Archivio di Stato in Milan in 2015. These records, examined during the 2024 investigation, mention providing baptismal certificates and character references to German refugees seeking to emigrate. The practice, while controversial, was widespread. The baptismal certificates, showing Catholic confirmation, helped individuals obtain visas to predominantly Catholic Argentina. Whether Friedrich obtained such documentation remains unclear, but the timing and route suggest he likely benefited from similar assistance. Swiss Protestant records also show no trace of Heinrich Waldmann before 1944, meaning his religious documentation, if it existed, was likely falsified or obtained through sympathetic clergy. The network's ultimate revelation is this: individual escapes like Friedrich's weren't anomalies. They were systematic, facilitated by networks that blended humanitarian assistance with criminal facilitation, profit motive with political sympathy, and genuine refugee relief with enabling war criminals. Friedrich Hartman navigated this morally complex system with precision, becoming one of hundreds who vanished into the chaos of post-war migration. The final year's mystery. The trail goes cold in 1958. The final withdrawal from Heinrich Waldmann's Swiss bank account in March of that year marks the last verified documentary evidence of Friedrich Hartmann's existence. Everything beyond this point becomes speculation, fragmented evidence, and testimony from sources that can't be fully verified. But investigators refuse to abandon the search for Friedrich's final chapter. The August 2024 phase of the investigation focuses on tracing Germans and Swiss nationals living in Argentina during the 1940–1960 period, cross-referencing names, ages, and occupations with known details about Friedrich's false identity. Argentine immigration records from this era are notoriously incomplete. The Perón government, which ruled Argentina from 1946 to 1955, maintained a deliberately welcoming policy toward European immigrants, particularly those with technical skills or financial resources. The government asked few questions about wartime activities, viewing European refugees as valuable additions to Argentina's workforce and economy. Buenos Aires, with its large German and Austrian expatriate communities, becomes the focus. The city hosted an estimated 180,000 German speakers by 1950, making it one of the largest Germanic populations outside Europe. Within this community, individuals could maintain relative anonymity, speaking their native language, preserving cultural traditions, and avoiding the scrutiny that might have occurred in smaller, more isolated locations. Researchers identify 3 potential sightings or references to Heinrich Waldmann in Buenos Aires archives between 1947 and 1956. The first is a business license application filed in 1947 for H. Waldman Import-Export Consulting, listing an address in the Belgrano district, a predominantly middle-class neighborhood. The business appears in city directories through 1952, then disappears. The second reference appears in membership records for the Club Alemán, a social organization for German expatriates. Heinrich Waldmann is listed as a member from 1948 to 1953. Membership required sponsorship from existing members, suggesting Friedrich had successfully integrated into the expatriate community. The third reference, most intriguing and frustrating, comes from a 1953 police report filed in Buenos Aires. The report documents a minor traffic accident involving a vehicle registered to Heinrich Waldmann, age 41, merchant. The age matches Friedrich's actual age, but the report contains no photograph, no detailed physical description beyond male, approximately 175 centimeters, gray eyes, generic enough to match thousands of individuals. But the most significant evidence of Friedrich's final years comes not from official documents, but from the letter discovered in June 2024 in a Buenos Aires private collection. The letter, dated March 1953 and addressed to "My Dearest Greta," provides rare insight into Friedrich's emotional state nearly a decade after his escape. The letter's full text, translated from German, reads, "My dearest Greta, I think of you often, though I know this message may never reach you. The years since I left the mountains have been lonely. Milan grew too dangerous after 46, so I moved south, then across the ocean. The warmth here reminds me of nothing from home. I am safe, but I am no one. Sometimes I wonder if survival was worth the price of becoming a ghost. I see my reflection and don't recognize the man looking back. Heinrich is a costume I wear, but inside I remain Friedrich, the father of 2 children who died in fire, the husband of a woman buried in rubble. There is no justice in this world, only those who escape and those who don't. I escaped, but I brought nothing with me except memories that burn more painfully than any punishment a court could deliver. If there is accounting after death, I will face it. Until then, I exist in the spaces between official records, a name without history, a life without meaning. Your loving ghost, F. The letter's authenticity has been confirmed through handwriting analysis and paper dating. It was preserved by a German expatriate family in Buenos Aires and discovered among estate materials after the last family member died in 2019. The family had no connection to Friedrich that researchers can identify, suggesting the letter may have been entrusted to them for safekeeping or delivery to an intended recipient who never claimed it. The letter confirms Friedrich survived at least until 1953, living in Buenos Aires under his false identity. But it also reveals profound psychological suffering, a man haunted by the family he lost, the identity he abandoned, and the isolation his survival required. After 1953, evidence becomes nearly impossible to verify. Argentine death records from the 1950s and 1960s are incomplete, particularly for foreign nationals. Researchers have identified 4 Heinrich Waldmann death registrations in Argentina between 1955 and 1975, but none include sufficient detail to confirm identity. Without DNA comparison material or photographs, verification is impossible. One researcher, Dr. Sofia Reyes from the University of Buenos Aires, has developed a hypothesis based on circumstantial evidence. If we assume the traffic accident report and club membership records are accurate, she explains, then Friedrich was living openly in Buenos Aires through at least 1953. The cessation of his Swiss bank account activity in 1958 suggests either death or a deliberate decision to cut all ties to his European past. Given his age, 46 in 1958, natural death seems unlikely. I believe he may have moved again, possibly to a more remote location in Argentina or even to another South American country. Some evidence supports this theory. German expatriate communities existed throughout South America, in Chile, Paraguay, Brazil, and Uruguay. Friedrich, with his experience in logistics and his language skills, could have continued operating in business or commerce in any of these locations. One tantalizing piece of evidence emerges from Paraguay. A German-language newspaper, Deutsche Zeitung für Paraguay, published in Asunción, contains a death notice in its August 12, 1964 edition. Heinrich Waldmann, age 52, passed peacefully on August 8, survived by no known relatives. Service will be held at the German Lutheran Church. The age matches Friedrich's birth year of 1912. The lack of surviving relatives aligns with his isolated circumstances. But verification proves impossible. Paraguayan records from the 1960s are sparse. The German Lutheran Church in Asunción closed in 1978, and its records were lost. The cemetery where burials from that period occurred has no searchable database. Researchers attempted to locate the burial site, but found cemetery records damaged by flooding in 1983. We may never know with certainty when or where Friedrich Hartman died, Dr. Kovacs concludes in her final investigation report, published in November 2024. What we know is this: he survived the war, assumed a false identity with remarkable skill, lived for at least 13 years under that identity, and died somewhere in South America, probably in the 1960s. He maintained enough financial resources to live comfortably but not ostentatiously. He integrated into German expatriate communities but remained psychologically isolated, haunted by the family he lost and the identity he abandoned. The investigation also uncovers no evidence that Friedrich ever returned to Europe or attempted contact with surviving relatives in Germany. Johann Kepler, Friedrich's nephew, confirmed that no family member ever received communication from Friedrich after his 1944 disappearance. If he sent letters, Kepler says, he sent them to people we don't know about, or he destroyed them himself. He became a ghost, and ghosts don't return home. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Friedrich's final years is the complete absence of legacy. He left no children in his new life, no business empire, no notable achievements. Heinrich Waldmann existed, conducted modest business, participated minimally in social organizations, and vanished into death as quietly as Friedrich Hartmann had vanished from life. The final mystery remains. In his last moments, did Friedrich think of himself as Heinrich, the identity he'd worn for 2 decades, or Friedrich, the man he'd been before everything collapsed? Did he feel relief at escaping accountability, or did he carry the weight of survivor's guilt until the end? The letter from 1953 suggests the latter, but 10 or 15 more years of life could have changed his perspective, or deepened his isolation into permanent numbness. Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann died twice, once officially in 1945, in the records that listed him among thousands of casualties of a dying regime, and once actually, somewhere in South America in the 1960s, as an old man with a false name and a past he could never fully escape. Ethical and historical reflection. The discovery of Friedrich Hartmann's escape route and his subsequent life raises uncomfortable questions about justice, accountability, and the nature of survival in catastrophic circumstances. These questions have no simple answers, and they continue to divide historians, ethicists, and the public as the investigation's findings become widely known. Dr. Kovacs' team, in their final report, dedicates an entire section to the ethical dimensions of Friedrich's story. We must resist the temptation to view this case through a simplified moral lens, the report states. Friedrich Hartmann was not a Nazi ideologue. He wasn't an SS officer who participated in genocide. He wasn't a concentration camp guard or a member of the Einsatzgruppen. He was a supply officer, a logistician, a technician of war who happened to serve an evil regime. But does this distinction matter? This question becomes the center of heated debate among the researchers and the broader historical community. Some argue that every member of the Wehrmacht, regardless of specific role, bears responsibility for enabling the Nazi regime's crimes. By maintaining supply lines, officers like Friedrich made the war machine function. Without logistics, armies cannot fight, cannot occupy territory, cannot implement policies of extermination. Professor Daniel Goldstein, a Holocaust historian at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, offers a harsh assessment. The idea that supply officers or administrators were somehow innocent bystanders is a convenient fiction, he argues in a September 2024 interview. The Holocaust required logistics, trains to transport victims, supplies to construct camps, fuel to operate crematoria. Every Wehrmacht officer, regardless of specialty, contributed to these crimes through their service. Hartmann's escape represents a failure of justice, another Nazi who evaded accountability. Others take a more nuanced view. Dr. Marcus Friedlander, the German military historian involved in the investigation, sees Friedrich's case as emblematic of the impossible moral situations war creates. Friedrich lost his entire family to Allied bombing, Friedlander notes. His wife and children died because of the war, a war Germany started but which consumed guilty and innocent alike. At what point does Friedrich's personal tragedy mitigate his service to an evil regime? I'm not saying he deserves sympathy, but I am saying the moral calculus isn't simple. The fact that Friedrich showed no evidence of war crimes complicates the ethical judgment. Extensive investigation of his unit's activities in occupied Poland revealed no participation in atrocities. Nazi-Einheit 447's role was strictly logistical. While other units in the same areas committed horrific crimes, Friedrich's unit appears to have functioned as exactly what it claimed: a supply unit moving equipment and materials. But some victims' advocates argue this misses the point. Rachel Eisenberg, representing a Holocaust survivors organization based in New York, responds forcefully. Every Nazi who escaped is an injustice to the millions who died. It doesn't matter if he personally killed anyone. He served the regime, he benefited from the regime, and when the regime fell, he ran rather than face judgment. That's not the story of an innocent man. That's the story of a coward who valued his own survival over accountability. The question of what judgment Friedrich should have faced, had he not escaped, also generates debate. As a Wehrmacht officer without evidence of specific war crimes, Friedrich likely would have faced denazification proceedings, the Allied process of removing Nazi influence from German society. Middle-ranking officers without specific criminal accusations typically received penalties ranging from fines to brief imprisonment, followed by rehabilitation. Some historians argue that this relatively lenient treatment partially justifies Friedrich's decision to escape. If the likely punishment was a year in prison and some fines, one researcher notes, then Friedrich's elaborate escape seems excessive. But he couldn't have known in 1944 what post-war justice would look like. From his perspective, facing Soviet or Allied captivity might have meant execution or years in harsh prison camps. His escape was a rational response to uncertainty. But this argument fails to satisfy many critics, who point out that Friedrich never attempted to turn himself in later, when post-war justice procedures became clear and less severe. If he genuinely believed he was innocent of serious crimes, why didn't he eventually reveal himself? The fact that he maintained his false identity until death suggests consciousness of guilt, or at minimum, unwillingness to face even mild accountability. The psychological dimension of Friedrich's story adds another layer of complexity. The 1953 letter reveals a man tormented by his choices, haunted by the family he lost, and deeply isolated in his false life. Does this suffering constitute a form of punishment? Some argue that Friedrich sentenced himself to decades of psychological imprisonment, perhaps a harsher punishment than any court could have imposed. He was a ghost for 20 years, Dr. Reyes from Buenos Aires notes, never able to use his real name, acknowledge his real history, or maintain connections with anyone who knew him as Friedrich. That's a particular kind of hell. I'm not saying it's equivalent to formal justice, but it's not the comfortable escape that people imagine. Yet this argument rings hollow to many survivors and their descendants. Eva Rosenbaum, whose family perished in Auschwitz, offers a devastating response. He chose that loneliness. The people my family members became, they didn't choose. They were murdered. His psychological suffering, if it even existed, was self-inflicted and avoidable. The suffering of Holocaust victims was imposed and inescapable. There is no moral equivalence here. The investigation also reveals the broader failure of post-war justice. Friedrich was one of hundreds, possibly thousands, who successfully disappeared. The networks that facilitated these escapes operated with remarkable efficiency, exploiting chaos, bribery, and international indifference. The fact that so many succeeded in escaping raises disturbing questions about the post-war commitment to accountability. Some historians argue that the Cold War priorities superseded justice concerns. As tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies intensified, pursuing every former Wehrmacht officer became less important than rebuilding West Germany as a bulwark against communism. Many former Nazis were quietly rehabilitated, their pasts overlooked in favor of their potential utility in the new geopolitical struggle. Friedrich's escape predated these Cold War calculations, but he benefited from the resulting environment of limited accountability. By the time systematic Nazi hunting operations intensified in the 1960s, Friedrich had been Heinrich for nearly 2 decades, successfully integrated into Argentine society, beyond effective reach. The ethical questions extend to the researchers themselves. Should Friedrich's story be told? Does publicizing his successful escape glorify evasion of justice? Dr. Kovacs addresses this directly in the investigation's conclusion. We tell this story not to celebrate Friedrich Hartmann's ingenuity, but to document how justice failed, she writes. Every successful escape represents victims who received no accountability. We owe it to those victims to understand how these failures occurred, so similar failures can be prevented. But some disagree, arguing that detailed documentation of escape methods provides a blueprint for future war criminals. By publishing the exact route, the specific techniques, the network contacts, one critic argues, we're essentially writing a how-to guide for escaping accountability. That serves no legitimate historical purpose. The counterargument emphasizes that understanding historical injustice requires confronting uncomfortable truths. Friedrich's escape succeeded because multiple systems failed: border security, document authentication, post-war refugee screening, and international cooperation. Documenting these failures serves historical education and potentially helps prevent similar failures in contemporary contexts. As the investigation concludes in late 2024, no consensus emerges on Friedrich Hartmann's moral status. He remains a complicated figure, neither purely villainous nor sympathetic, neither war criminal nor innocent victim. He was a man who made choices, some imposed by catastrophic circumstances, others reflecting personal calculation and self-interest. Perhaps the most honest assessment comes from Johann Kepler, Friedrich's nephew, who provides closing thoughts to investigators. "My uncle was not a monster," Kepler says, "but he was also not a hero. He was a man who served an evil regime, lost everything he loved, and chose survival over accountability. I understand why he did it. I might have done the same. But understanding doesn't mean approval, and empathy doesn't mean forgiveness. He made his choice and he lived with it or died with it, however long he survived. That's all anyone can say." Closing. November 2024. The tunnel near Wolfgangsee has been carefully preserved. The Austrian government, in consultation with German and international historical organizations, decides the site should become a memorial and educational center. Not a memorial to Friedrich Hartmann, but to the thousands of stories like his, complex, morally ambiguous narratives of survival, escape, and justice evaded. Dr. Kovacs returns to the site on a cold November morning, 80 years almost to the day after Friedrich Hartmann sealed his military identity in a steel footlocker and walked away into a false life. The tunnel entrance has been stabilized with modern engineering, made safe for visitors. The chambers inside have been preserved exactly as discovered, with the footlocker and its contents displayed behind protective glass. A plaque at the entrance reads, "This tunnel represents one man's escape from accountability in the aftermath of World War II. It stands as a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied, and that every successful escape represents victims who received no closure. We preserve this site not to celebrate Friedrich Hartmann's ingenuity, but to ensure his story, and the thousands like it, are never forgotten." The memorial opens to the public in January 2025. It attracts historians, students, and descendants of both victims and perpetrators of the Nazi regime. The site becomes part of a broader conversation about accountability, survival, and the long shadow cast by historical crimes. For Dr. Kovacs, the investigation has been both professionally significant and personally haunting. "I've spent my career excavating the physical remnants of war," she reflects. "Bunkers, fortifications, weapons caches. But this is the first time I've excavated a life, or rather, the intersection between a life that ended and a life that began in its place. Friedrich Hartmann died in this tunnel in 1944, and Heinrich Waldmann was born here. The fact that both were the same person, that a human being can erase himself and continue existing as someone else, is terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. The broader implications of the discovery continue to reverberate through the historical community. Researchers have begun investigating similar cases, searching for other tunnels, hidden caches, and documentary evidence of escapes. The techniques developed during the Hartman investigation, combining DNA analysis, international archive cooperation, and forensic document examination, provide a template for solving other long-cold historical mysteries. But many questions remain unanswered. How many others escaped using similar methods? How many false identities exist in historical records, names attached to people who were really someone else? How many men and women who should have faced judgment for their actions instead lived comfortable lives under stolen identities? These questions haunt the investigation's conclusion. Every answer generates new questions. Every solved mystery reveals 10 more unsolved. The tunnel near Wolfgangsee, carefully excavated and preserved, represents both closure and opening, the end of one mystery and the beginning of recognition of how much remains unknown. On a personal level, Friedrich Hartman's story offers no satisfying resolution. He wasn't captured. He didn't face trial. He didn't provide testimony or make restitution. He simply vanished into the vast anonymity of post-war migration and died as someone else, probably in the 1960s, probably in South America, probably believing he had successfully escaped everything except his own memories. But the Earth kept his secret for 81 years, then revealed it. The tunnel, buried under 40 feet of alpine soil, preserved the evidence of his transformation from Friedrich to Heinrich, from Wehrmacht officer to ghostly merchant, from a man with history to a man without past. The discovery poses a final, haunting question. What other secrets remain buried? How many other tunnels exist, still undiscovered, containing evidence of escapes, transformations, and justice evaded? How many other men and women successfully disappeared into false lives, leaving behind only rumors and unverifiable stories? The answer, most historians agree, is that we'll never know the full scale. Friedrich Hartmann's tunnel was discovered by chance, by a construction crew digging in exactly the right location at exactly the right depth. Most other such hiding places will remain hidden forever, their secrets preserved by geography, luck, and the passage of time. But the discovery of even one such site changes the historical record. It confirms what was previously speculation. It provides concrete evidence of systems and networks that existed in shadow. It transforms maybe into definitely and rumored into documented. Sometimes the Earth keeps secrets for 8 decades. Sometimes construction crews strike concrete where none should exist. Sometimes steel footlockers rust through, allowing their contents to survive as evidence. And sometimes, just sometimes, history receives an unexpected revision, a postscript written by a man who thought he'd erased himself from the story. Friedrich Wilhelm Hartmann appears in official records as a casualty of war, one name among millions who died in the Third Reich's final collapse. But the truth, preserved in a tunnel in the Austrian Alps, tells a different story. He didn't die in 1945. He transformed, escaped, and lived for years or decades as someone else. The tunnel stands now as testament to that transformation, and as a reminder that even the most carefully constructed disappearances eventually leave traces. Time, that patient excavator, reveals what was hidden. The Earth, that reliable keeper of secrets, eventually surrenders what it holds. And the question lingers, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. How many other secrets remain buried, waiting for an unexpected excavator, a chance discovery, a moment when the Earth decides to reveal what it has protected for so long? The tunnel near Wolfgangsee has given up its secret. How many others remain, silent and concealed, containing stories that could rewrite history one disappeared life at a time?